Bo, welcome back to the podcast. You know, you and I have had some crazy conversations about some ideas. Your website, bookbud.ai was revolutionary. Our audience went nuts about how to write a book in a few hours. Today, we're going to jump into some great ideas. Excited about having you on.
Thank you. It's so great to be back. I appreciate it.
You know, today's big, bold idea, where do you want to go?
I want to talk about mostly about how people are wrong a lot more than they think they are. And most people, statistically speaking, are wrong about a lot of things.
I got you. And look, a lot of that's really holding us back, right? There's this critical thinking, the kind of what happened or what was said or what's actually happening. This is kind of what happened. And there's kind of the story about what happened and how that's holding us back, right? A little bit of, I can work right there. If I start with that work, a good place for me to start to unwind and look at maybe looking at things a lot differently.
Right. So what you're talking about there, about what happened and the story of what happened, in psychology, we call that the narrative, a narrative that we create about a certain situation or about ourselves. So, for example, if I like to use the somewhat controversial example, if let's say you or I go on to the subway, right, and we're going over to the next stop, and somebody walks by us and we feel their hand rub against our butt, right? So a couple ways we could handle this. Either somebody walked by us and their hand accidentally hit our butt, or we could say we've been sexually abused and we could go to therapy for the next 3 weeks. Either way, the fact is the same. What happened, how we decide to take that fact and process it makes all the difference in the world. And this has been looked at in a lot of trauma, like psychology, how people look at certain things that happen to them, and do they internalize it? Do they make it a larger deal than it actually is? Do they get a realistic evaluation of what happened? Do they, in order to like take the proper precautions so it doesn't happen again, or are they doing it more for a let's say a self-pity party? Because a lot of times people, it feels good when you're the victim of something and you're getting a lot of attention. That's just one example. That's more in like in kind of like the mental health aspect. But in critical thinking, the same thing applies to everything, like the narrative that we create. And that narrative that we create can take us far away from the facts of the situation. And this is how we have a country or even a world with smart people that have such widely different views on like recent and current events, like everything that happened. It's like how it's crazy to think about it. We're not talking about something in history that happened, when back in the 1800s. We're talking about something that could have happened like literally yesterday. And yet so many people have different opinions or views of it. And it's based on a lot of different factors. But one that you point out is the narrative that we choose to create, or that somebody chooses to create for us and we accept.
It's hard to explain that narrative to people. I think that there's, and understand that comes with a whole bunch of biases that are forming these conversations that are really getting in our way. Right. And one of the things I did a practice with somebody, it's a lot like these glasses, right? If I put these glasses on, I see the world through this lens, right? I see the world through this lens, and those biases are kind of the same way, right? When I look at the world through my upbringing, through my religious beliefs, through my worldview, right? When I start to look at my family's political ideations, all of the things that were brought into my lenses, now I'm seeing the world through that and kind of what happened, what happened. And now I look through these lenses and that interprets what I make up what happened, right? The story I make up about what happened. And I feel like that is something we're seeing in our political world right now. It's this craziness, where, we had an assassination, and all of a sudden people are like, forgetting that that's a human being that got shot at, right? And there were people that, I don't care what side they were on, they were just the way that they looked at it, like, well, he deserved it, and I'm like, I don't care what side we're on. That's a human being that got shot, right? And there was those kind of things that, because there's such a charge that gets represented, but it doesn't matter what the reality is. There's a charge to the belief about the political group or whatever, the religious group. I mean, it's throughout the financial group, these imaginary lines in the sand we call United States or Israel or Gaza, or there's these charges that we make up and we bring to what's happening that distorts our ability to see things with anything other than this distortion.
Right. Right. There's this one fallacy that I call overextension. And what we're talking about here is, I'll give you a nice non-controversial example this time. That's
yeah, right. Sorry, I didn't mean to get controversial.
No. It's great. I love talking about that stuff, but we'll keep it level on this podcast. One of the examples I like to use is when people talk about like, oh my God, I saw a UFO, not even that. I saw a flying saucer and it was like blinking lights and it was going slow, and they kind of describe it and they say they saw a flying saucer. Like even if they say they saw a UFO, which is a little bit, more correct technically, unidentified flying object, they don't know what it is. But a lot of times they'll say it's a UFO, meaning that it's an alien spaceship. Now, the truth of what happened is they saw, like literally, they saw flashing lights in the sky that jumped around or whatever. That's it. Those are the facts right there. Now, through the lens, they may have been brought up watching a lot of sci-fi, or maybe they're into government conspiracies and they think like the aliens are all around us, whatever. This is the lens that you're referring to, and they're wearing those glasses that say these lights that I'm actually seeing, which are technically lights. I mean, that's the fact of it. I see lights in the sky that flash and move from here to there. They're saying that it's an alien ship, or they're saying it's a UFO, meaning that it's an alien ship. So they're overextending. They're not thinking factually. They're not thinking critically. They're saying this is what it probably is. Although they don't mean probably. What they mean is this is what it plausibly is. Plausibility is different from probability. Probability, we're talking about statistics. We're talking about math. We have absolutely zero, definite facts about like lights in the sky being alien spaceships, like zero, right? But so we can't figure out probably what the lights would be, but plausibly people would say, well, it's plausible that aliens are visiting Earth. So it's plausible that was an alien spaceship, and that's what I saw. And then, so already they're taking their worldview and they're kind of bending reality to their worldview. So they're making a claim that's not really justified. But in addition to that, we have a lot of other biases that makes that claim even stronger. Because, wow, if you saw an alien spaceship, you got a wonderful story to tell, right? At parties, and you're going to be like the most interesting person in the room. So there's that bias. There's that bias pulling you in. If you happen to be involved in groups and online groups and discussions where people talk about this stuff all the time, now you have your own personal story. Well, now you're even more part of this group. You've got this new social cohesion, this bonding. So you've got that pulling you towards this irrational, essentially, conclusion of what you saw. So there are tons of biases like that completely distort our perspective. And we have to constantly get back to the core facts. And the core facts is we saw a light in the sky, and the light moved from there to there and it blinked. That's it. That's all we could say factually. And we got to remember that.
Right. Just pure data. Look, that's lights blinking, period. Now, all that other story becomes, this works out with my wife and I all the time. This happens, I have a lens that I listen to her through all the time. She'll come down, maybe in the morning, and she'll say, what's going on? And all of a sudden, I'm like, nothing's going on. What are you talking about? What are you like? All of a sudden, I'm mad, and
it's accusatory. What's going on?
Yeah, like all of a sudden, it's like an accusatory. Like what's going on? I'm like, she just said, hey, what's going on? And I literally will, depending on my view or my mood or where I'm at, right? I could react in multiple ways. I mean, has that happened to you before, where you're like, you literally bring to it, and I step back and go, all she did was ask what was going on, and I just jumped through a hoop and brought in a whole bunch of other stuff that, it could be something I'm dealing with, something I feel guilty about, something I'm not sure. Like, there's a whole ton of things that are in that lens.
Yeah, that's important to understand with human behavior in general, not just from your perspective, but let's look at that situation from the perspective of your wife. Like, she could either take that one of two ways. Again, the narrative that we're talking about. She could say, my husband is a jerk. He's a mean guy, and she could make it kind of like a character assassination in a way, and hold that against you. Or she could say, something's going on with him. Something's going on in his mind right now that caused him to respond that way. So it's not my husband, it's not the one I know and love. It's something's going on that caused him to react that way. And that obviously you could easily see which is a healthier way, and also which is the more accurate way. She's probably has, I don't know how long you've been married, 20, 30 years, whatever, of history saying that it's probably something going on in your head right now. It's a temporary situation. So that's why it's important when you're communicating with people, if they kind of freak out at you, it not to automatically assume it's a character thing, but it's probably safe to assume that something may be going on with them, or at least ask the question, like, here, are you all right? Are you okay? Is there anything I could do? Do you want to talk about something? It's a good way to start.
Well, my brain is this meaning-making machine, right? It's constantly making up stories to fit its narrative, its worldview. When I can recognize that, right? When I can really, and that's not all the time. Look, I would say most of the time I don't recognize it, and I have to deal with it later. I think I'm doing a better job today than ever before. But right, there still is, this thing that, the brain has these unconscious things that they hijack it. We just recently had this hurricane that was going down through Florida. I'm not even in Florida. I'm in Chicago, and it was like COVID all over again, right? All of a sudden I was like mentally getting hijacked by these stories and what was going to happen and how much destruction was going to happen. And now they've got news that really, it's like the drug of news today, right? At one point, the most crazy line that was out there was, write your name and phone number
on your forearm, right?
On your forearm, in case you get dismembered. You're like, that just hijacked me. And I was like a 12-year-old kid on the news writing her name on her. I'm like, oh my God, like boom, like that hijacked me. Right. And you just notice how you can get hijacked at any moment as this brain, and keeping it aware, like, dude, you just got completely hijacked. My wife will come back and go, hey, you're going to have to stop watching TV. you are it's like doing shots over there. You're getting like mentally hijacked. So,
well, if you think about news or TV or whatever, or let's just talk about the media in general, it's ubiquitous too. We're not just talking about like left wing, right wing. We're talking about the media. We're talking about websites. We're talking about YouTube channels, Instagram accounts, whatever. You got to think about like what they exist for. There probably was a time when I don't even know, maybe this is a rosy retrospection on my part, but I would like to think that there was a time when these organizations began to, as like a social good, right, to inform people, to keep people up to date. The whole point of the United States is to have an educated, a knowledgeable is probably the better word, electorate, citizenship, where people can make the right choices when it comes time to cast their votes. This is how the country succeeds, when people have the right information. So it makes sense to have like these media sources that could give people the right information that they need. Okay, again, I'm not saying that it was ever like that. I'd like to think it was like that. Or maybe when it was in the boardroom of, okay, let's start the first TV show. What's the point of that? That's what they talked about. But I think what happened over time, or maybe was from the beginning, is that it quickly got to be about money, right? Even like a public network, I mean, you need money to survive. So you can't just purely just put out facts, because that's going to bore people to death. There's got to be like entertainment value. And then people started to realize that, especially with social media, that it's more than just entertainment value. There are ways to actually get people addicted. There are ways to, as you say, hijack their thought processes. And so they would think nothing more than about what you want them to think about, and therefore kind of be addicted to following along. And I know, like when the hurricane was going, well, my daughter's in Florida, so like in that, she was like right on the line of the hurricane. So I did have another interest, but I was watching the news like all the time, like, okay, what's going on here? What's going to happen? But that's the point. You know, they want to keep you addicted. They want to keep it interesting. And people found there were shortcuts. There's the right way to do it, the ethically right way, let's say. And the ethically right way is to keep things interesting. You could definitely add entertainment value. You could add discussions where you have both sides, you have some argumentation, you know, people on different sides, and that's interesting, but that's also honest. Or you can just completely lie and you can exaggerate. So if you're not just going for the lying, there's like 100 other ways that you could actually lie without lying directly. And that includes, like, you know, exaggeration.
Well, yeah, I mean, information you would think makes us better, right? Yep. We all want great information, but I think throughout history we've learned that the lie gets us more entertained. You know, There was a time where when the first printing presses came out, you would think news of the day would be the most important thing people wanted to hear, and it wasn't. The number one book when the printing press came out was about great witch hunts. Right. And how witches would steal your penis. And like that became the number one book bestseller out there, and everybody got it. Every time, you know, a woman would fight with her husband, all of a sudden, you know, they'd end up being burned at the stake. And you're like, what's going on here? But all of a sudden, this propaganda, these stories about witches come out, and people are like, "Oh my God, did you hear about these witches who steal men's penises?" And it became the number one selling book out there, and it literally changed society, right? As opposed to, you would think, you know, the printing press comes out, maybe we start to know more about news and what's going on with our local government. Nope, they want to hear about witches and penises.
Right. Well, this actually brings us to my number one rule of critical thinking, and that's you have to want to know what is true. You have to put that over anything else. And believe it or not, most people aren't like that. Most people don't really care what's true. They care what's interesting, what makes them feel good, what confirms their biases, and that's like when we have strong beliefs, we like to hear things that substantiate those beliefs as opposed to contradict them. Therefore, we don't want, and if the truth contradicts them, we don't want to hear the truth. We want to hear what makes us feel better. That is a huge problem. So, and this is something that you could do something about. Everybody could do something about. And you got to commit to yourself. You got to say, no, I want to be the type of person where I care what is true. That's it. And I understand the consequences that sometimes I'm going to hear true things that don't make me feel good.
Right.
That maybe it's about politics, about religion, or maybe it's about business. Maybe it's about your own business. You're starting a business and people tell you this really isn't a good idea. And the right thing to do would be to get out of this thing and cut your losses. But some people don't want to hear that, so they don't. They listen to people like their friends and family who say, "Oh, you're great. You've got a great idea. Keep going with it," and they end up losing all their money. So not only is this something that's important in our personal lives, but it's also something important in our business. You got to commit to the truth, and I guarantee you, in like virtually all cases, knowing the truth will put you in a better position. And more than that, it's the lifestyle, it's the habit of wanting to know what's true that puts you in a better position for like every decision that you're going to make going forward. And some people think that they could compartmentalize. They could say, all right, I really care about what's true in business and and maybe in my social life. But when it comes to politics and religion, look, I've got a religious group that I like to stay with, and I know people are telling me that's not the truth, but it makes me feel good, so I'm sticking with that. And I know all my family are on one side of the political spectrum, and if I were to disagree with them, it would make it really uncomfortable for me, so I'm going to stick with that. That may seem like a good thing, and the only caveat here, the only time it's a good thing is when, let's say you're a 14-year-old kid who's gay, and if you tell your highly religious parents that you're gay, they're going to kick you out of the house, and your life is essentially going to be ruined. You may want to hold that back for a while. But for the most part, it's about believing what's true and making that commitment. And wherever life takes you, it's going to take you in the right direction if you follow the truth.
It's hard to stay in the truth. I often laugh about, if we were to talk about what it takes to run a government, right, where your tax monies actually go and how human beings mess things up, and even government messes things up. And, but to write, if I were to read out the tax rules and actually what happens, nobody want to know. I mean, look, it would, if I had a TV channel that talked about, all the taxes and tax stuff that happened, and that's all we talked about. Hey, this week we spent $30,000 getting a school thing up in here, and we did this over here. I'm guessing that would be it wouldn't be very popular if I had a different channel where I talked about tax scandals. Right. Where
well,
I would talk.
This is politics 101, and we see this today. We see this going on right now. Yeah. Like if you ask a politician, like, what are you going to do about the economy? What's your plan? The right answer is like a bulleted list, maybe a 3-page, like really detailed, showing how you're going to make the situation better. That's the right answer. The wrong answer, but the answer that people want to hear is, I'm going to make the best economy in the world. No economy is going to be better than the economy that I'm going to make. And my opponent, they're going to destroy the economy. But that's what your people want to hear. That's right. But that's not what they need to hear. Right. So there's a huge disconnect between what people want to hear and what they need to hear. And don't blame the politician. They're just playing the system. You have to make the change. You got to be one of the people who demand to be the type of person where you want to hear what you need to hear, and demand that from your politicians. And that's how we fix the system. We fix it. We don't just wait for a leader to come along that's going to do the right thing, because they're just kind of a reaction to us. So we need to fix the solution. We need to be the solution. We need to fix the problem.
Well, the same thing happens in business. When I don't drive my business by pure data, like, and look, I'm a creature of this. I do this all the time, right? Even the podcast, all the businesses I own. Look, if I really want to grow the business properly, right, I need to run it by data. Right? How many downloads do we have? How many audience members do we have? When are people listening? What's the data, right? But I don't know if it's ego or fear or even, there's all kinds of things that stop us from that. I was doing some stuff with some sales folks on CDO Group this weekend, really looking at the matrix of how many phone calls we're making and what the success rate of those are. And there's this like blindness or maybe not a desire to actually see it. Like, see, all right, how many phone calls did you actually make today? Well, I don't want to tell you, I didn't make any. Right. So all of a sudden you don't write that down, right? Because that becomes data that, I don't know, maybe we're ashamed of, right? But unless I can look at the real data and pure data, not my story about the data. I picked up the phone, I dialed this many numbers, right? They answered or didn't answer, right? I left a message or I didn't leave a message. That's pure data. Right. If I don't write that down and then I look at, all right, how am I actually doing? Right. Well, how many proposals went out this week? My judgment is that you can look at the pure data of my actions and you can see what the outcome is. Now, for some reason, there's this human bias not to do that. At least in all the work I've done in running businesses, there's this propensity not to do that. And I feel sometimes like I'm pulling teeth to get human beings to go that way. And maybe it's not that. Maybe it's completely me, right? So as a leader, I can say, hey, it starts with me. But What is that cause? What causes that to happen for me, for the organizations, to look at pure data about our thoughts, actions, and behaviors?
Yeah. So the desire to look at data is great. Let's not minimize that. I mean, that's kind of what you should be looking for. But one thing I do want to say about the data is, and let me preface this by saying that there was a book written in the 50s called How to Lie with Statistics. And it's still very popular today because it talks about essentially like raw data, how you could be presented with data or you could see data, and yet it could be completely against reality, even though the data is true. How could that happen? Well, there are many different ways. One thing is, the most common probably is like a lying by omission, right? You're giving one side of the story. You're just giving a piece of the data, but you're not sharing or looking for another very important part of the data that tells the whole story. Another way to do it is when you look at data in terms of like actual numbers versus percentages. So you could say something like, let's just say, let's use a political example today, saying like, and I'm just throwing this number out. I have no idea how true it is, but let's say there's 10,000 migrants a year get arrested for violent crimes. There's 10,000. Think about that number, 10,000. You're like, wow, that's a lot. Because you could say it that way. You could present it that way. 10,000 is a big number when you think about how much violent crime. But then you say, well, let's look at that as a percentage of the United States, a percentage of the population, percentage of migrants versus natural born citizens. And then you may see, oh my goodness, that's a lot smaller than the same percentage of natural born citizens. So you have two completely different stories based on the same data. You're just not looking at the data in the right terms. You're looking at the data as the raw figures as opposed to perspective, as opposed to percentage. And that's why, again, in today's political world, it's not as easy as like one side or the other presenting false information and being able to say, yeah, that's not true. A lot of times it is true. It's just not the whole truth. It's not the whole story. So you need to have that critical mind to be able to ask yourself, okay, I'm looking at the data. What is the whole story here? Is there data that I'm missing? Am I looking at the data in an incorrect way? And yeah, that's, if you do have that bias where you want your data to look good, you may not ask those questions about the data. And that's when it gets dangerous, because you may be saying this data looks good to me as is, so that's good enough.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying that human beings don't tell me the whole truth?
That's what I'm saying.
Come on,
not only human beings, but also
Bennett, come on. I can't believe that that's true. I mean, oh my God, and that what happens is this breakdown in our agreement with each other of trust, right? And therein lies where a lot of us today are suffering. Right. There's this breakdown in trust among people that are really close together. Look, I even say in the political world, most people aren't that far away from each other. Look, every man, every woman I've ever met wants the same thing primarily for their family. They want their family to grow. They want their family to do better, right? They want their kids to do better than they did. They want to live happy, joyous, and free, right? We're all looking for that. And ultimately, we're looking for the government to do just enough to support that, right? But we don't want to be in a spot where they're controlling our lives. But what's happened is we've lost trust. There's so many lies in the game. The fabric of it, and you can even feel it when you talk to someone of a different political persuasion than you are. There's like an anger towards it, right? Like a literally an anger to the other party, and it becomes this place where you're like, man, embedded in that conversation went from a reasonable discussion about differencing of opinions to maybe some resentment of, because I'm trying to defend being right. Doesn't matter what we're going to talk about. I need to defend my party.
position, right? So this is a perfect time to give you my rule number 2 when it comes to critical thinking. And that is, do your best to abandon all the labels that you carry. And the reason for this is because these labels that we have, whether it be Republican, Democrat, Christian, atheists, whatever, social justice warrior, anti-woke person, like, it doesn't matter. Whatever label you have, you're making that part of your identity, a part of who you are. Now, a lot of people, when it comes to argumentation, they always say, well, argue go after the facts. Argue the argument. Don't attack the person. You don't want to make it personal. You just want to go after their position, right? That seems like the right way to do it. But the fact is that most of us, when we have these strong identities, our position is us. Like, we are our position.
Yeah.
So if you're attacking my position, you're attacking the person. There's no disconnecting that. The solution to this is to be the type of person who doesn't have these strong identities. You don't have these strong ideological positions. You're the type of person who is willing to go with the data, to follow the facts, and wherever it leads, so be it. If you commit to being that type of person, that is wonderful. So, like, politically speaking, and I'll come out and say it, I'm a registered independent. I am a proud and registered independent. I have been my whole life. What that means for me is every single election cycle, I could look at the different parties, the different candidates, and I could make fair and at least the least biased judgments as I can. And then I could choose who I think would be better to vote for. And I can make that. I'm not defending any parties. I don't care about that. I have no allegiance to any parties. So therefore, I don't have all of those biases that come along with that. And the same thing, again, goes with religious issues, social issues, whatever, any kind of issues. If you abandon your ideologies, abandon all these labels, then you're putting yourself in a much better position to make the best judgment possible.
It's a tough one, right? It literally is one of the toughest places to be, to let go of all those ideological, I'm an American, I'm a Christian, I'm a man, I'm a middle-class man, right? All of these positions create these blocks, and, or positions where we're stuck defending it, and you can't see the truth. And I think that's a good one. From my position, I can't hear the truth. I can't hear the raw data, and to start with that and go, Right. So a lot of the story I've been playing with lately is the story that says, how could the opposite of what I'm thinking be true? Right. If I walk into a conversation with somebody and I notice myself getting, riled up, right? How could the opposite of what I'm thinking be true? Has been a gift, right? Where I could look at it and go, how could, directly what's going on? And, I happened with a position yesterday where someone was, got mad at me about something, and I was able to stop for a second and go, what if they're right? Right? What if they're absolutely right that, whatever the issue was, I was at cause for what happened there. And maybe there's a gift for me to go have another way of looking at life that would be a lot more freeing and opening, right? As opposed to being defensive and stuck in that way of being.
Yeah. So there are some ways that we can look at things differently, right? And it would still be, let's say, intellectually honest, because the stories that we create, they could be anything, just how it makes us feel. And there's no right or wrong way. This is pretty much what the definition of optimism and pessimism. You're still looking at the facts the same way. You're not bending the facts. It's just how you feel about, how you internalize this information, and which ultimately makes you more of an optimist or a pessimist. It's also genetically and biologically ingrained, so we don't have a lot of sway over that, but we do have some sway. But then there's also the facts itself. So a lot of times we make bad narratives. We create wrong narratives because the facts that we are getting are just like plain wrong. So I think that's important. Like before you even go down that road, it's like, okay, how should I feel about this? One of the first things you should really do is like, is this true? Like, is this an objective fact? Is this something that we could prove or disprove? And a lot of times there are weasel words involved, meaning that you could say something that the idea of it is wrong, but if you like technically the words, you're not lying, like it's right. So you got to watch out for that. It's a way that people could easily manipulate you into believing anything by wording something in such a way to make it so they can't be wrong. Like it's unfalsifiable, we call it, like the claim that they're making because of the way they worded it. So it's a lot more.
Give me an example of that.
So like an example, let's say a political example, something unfalsifiable. Like Joe Biden is the best president in the history of presidents. Like, okay, that seems like an opinion. Like, so the question is like not to get mad. Like if you don't like Joe Biden, not to get mad. Say, oh my God, he's the worst, because you're making the same mistake. You're just making like a judgment. You're making an unfalsifiable statement. What we would say, okay, this is a fair question. You know, how good is a president? Let's look at the different metrics, right? And how could we objectively say that one president is better than the other? Under what metrics? So then we could agree on like a level of metrics, and not only do this with president, but do this with the country. You know, is America a good country? Is America a great country? Let's look at the different metrics based on whatever, based on GDP, happiness, how much infantile death we have. You know, we could just go down a list of like 50 different things, which they have done. And then you have like a somewhat objective, I mean, there's some subjectivity to it, but it's a definitely more objective way of looking at things. So once we do that, we could really, we could quantify our decisions, and we could even move away from that. I mean, that's just something that maybe we leave for the researchers to do, right? But it may be where we can get something a little bit more like solid. Like we could say, okay, Joe Biden or let's say Donald Trump are like criminals. Like this is something, and how do you define criminal? Somebody who's been like arrested, or somebody who's been, who's been judged by a jury of their peers, and whatever. I mean, you could define what a criminal is, but that's something objective that you could say is true. Now that we have like something objective, we could agree that that's true or not true, and then we could decide how we're going to feel about it, the narrative that we're going to create about it. So it's good when people are making arguments and they say things that are just unfalsifiable, like opinions, like the best, the greatest, whatever. Kind of go back and say, okay, what do you mean by that? You know, how do you define greatest? How do you define best? Let's try to come up with something that is factual that we could agree on or disagree on, and take it from there. The discussions go in a much better direction when you're more clear on what you're talking about and there's less ambiguity involved.
Well, I think that comes true. And let's roll back to entrepreneurship, in that where our biases are stopping us, right? When we start to look at people, places, things, we start looking at our business, our abilities, right? These places that, or these ways of doing things. You know, I was reading Elon Musk's book, and I love when he talks about just his whole first principles theory of just ripping everything out of a process that's needed or a build that's needed, until the point where you've ripped out so much of it, you have to go backwards and add stuff back in. Right. I mean, there's places where I applied that to our business world after reading the book, and had a whole nother way of looking at stuff, all these reports and facts and checklists and all these things that we kind of created that are, you know, we thought were so important. Right. It's kind of like that government we keep growing, right? That the business practices that we keep growing that we think are systems, but truth are they were holding back the business. Right. When we start to look at those behaviors that, you know, look, why do we need to write that report every single week? I mean, truth is we need to know a couple of things off that report to feed the rest of the system. But that's taking someone, 3 to 5 hours a week to write that. And it's a complete waste of time. Right. And those kind of scenarios are throughout my business world. And every time I go look at challenging what I do hour by hour, minute by minute throughout my day, and go, yeah, this isn't really serving the company, or this isn't really serving the organization, or it's not really serving myself, right? I mean, I make up some stories about what I can do, what I can't do. I think that's the fun game to be in, is in challenging those things.
And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there with that term, a challenge and a game. And you see it as a game. And the goal of the game is to find more things that are true than false, like believe more things, true things than false things. That's kind of like the goal. And it's okay to be wrong. Here's another rule, is that you cannot be the type of person who thinks you're always right. Or you cannot be the type of person who is embarrassed about being wrong sometimes, because we're all wrong sometimes. And it's okay. I mean, this is where like the scientist in me comes out. The whole goal of science is to like prove things wrong. You have an idea and then you try to prove it wrong, right? You don't try to prove it right. You try to falsify it. You try to prove it wrong. And then if it is wrong, you learn something. You realize that your idea, your hypothesis is not really true. So that's advancing science. Okay. You've become smarter. You've helped other people become more knowledgeable, like if you publish your paper. And the same thing goes with any belief that you have. I mean, why would you want to be the person that holds on to the same beliefs in face of new and information that changes, like if you did accept it, would change your beliefs and your views? Like you wouldn't. You always want to work with the best information possible. And that's an admirable thing. And you have to be the type of person who appreciates that and who is proud of that. And you could say like, yeah, I used to believe in this, but I don't anymore because of the new information that I got. And I'm okay with that. And that takes us back to rule number 2. When you have like a really strong ideology, it's difficult to do that if that information takes you away from how you identify yourself.
Yeah, that's kind of what's happening in our social structure today. In those science papers that go back and go, hey, look, great scientists constantly want to be publishing new ideas that challenge the old ideas, right? Constantly, that's a healthy environment to be in, right? That really creates some great thinking. Unfortunately, what's happening nowadays is you can't challenge anybody today because there's such an emotional part of being, such an emotional part or such an egotistical approach to it that people get so emotionally charged up, even in challenging conversations, right? Even if, by the way, you're going to challenge some things and you're going to be wrong challenging them, right? I mean, that's the gift of a challenge. It's not saying I'm telling you I'm right. It's saying, hey, what if we looked at this and could there be another possibility that we're not seeing together? Yeah. Right? Like that to me is a friendly way of doing it. But unfortunately, I feel like what we've come to societally is that there's this fear of challenging each other that now you're going to mess up my social structure, that you challenging my beliefs or re-challenging my beliefs. All of a sudden you're challenging my society, my community, you're like, well, no, just trying to, wait. We're trying to look at something here so that other possibilities could get created, right? Because if I keep holding on to what is like it's real, right? Like, or my story like it's real, right? If I make it like a real story, there's no other possibility that can come out of that, right? I'm stuck with that. And that's kind of a victim mentality, right? That whole victimness of, well, I can't help it. My mother worked at Denny's and I can't believe, that one of my stories when I was a kid was my mother worked at Denny's and you'd be poor too if your mother worked at Denny's, right? And you'd go through drug addiction because you lived in a poor neighborhood. And the truth was when I reformulated that story and I looked at my mother worked her ass off to keep me fed, right? She did everything she did. She didn't speak English and right. She found a job that worked, right? When I looked at that in a different way And now I was accountable to my children to do whatever it took. Like all of a sudden, what was a bad story became the wind under my wings, right? You challenge that story that you carried, and all of a sudden there's a shift in that. And I think we could do that with a lot of the conversations that are holding us back, because we've got an amazing country. We live in one of the most amazing countries that's ever existed. Societies that have ever existed on this planet, and some of these old stories are holding us back.
Yeah. Yeah, and if we were to fix the country, if somebody were to consult me about it,
that's right.
I would try to create a system in which the goal isn't to get a gotcha soundbite. And that's what it seems like today. And again, this is thanks to social media, where everybody in Congress or the Senate wants to go viral with a viral moment where they take down the other side. And and this is so wrong. It's so backwards, because it doesn't help anybody, except for the person who gets the kudos for whatever, trashing the libs or the Republicans. It doesn't help us. And we've seen this as one of the most ineffective Congresses and leaderships there's been, because nobody could agree and nobody could get things done, because that's not their goal. Their goal isn't to try to solve the problem. Their goal is to try to score political points or to try to get to go viral with saying something cool. And that is completely backwards. So it'd be wonderful if we could somehow change that system to get it back to the point where everybody sees that they're working towards the same goal. And we've seen this in social psychology a lot. And it's when there have been like a bunch of different studies done where you have enemies that agree with different or that disagree on major issues or whatever, but then they come together with a common issue. And when they have this common issue, they kind of forget all their differences and work on their commonalities. And they're incredibly effective.
That's right.
And that's why we see, like within history, usually when like the country is at war, that's when everybody comes together, because there's no more like left and right or whatever. Now it's just the United States, and everybody comes together and they're prosperous and we do amazing things. But it would be nice for us to do amazing things and be prosperous without having to go to war, without having something that drastic having to shake things up. So I hope that we can get in that groove, but we'll see.
Well, Bennett, you are a gift to this planet. The work that you do. I mean, look, I love our conversations. They keep unwinding. And look, at the end of the day, I think we all want the same thing. We want to find a way to live create better lives for all of us, right? That putting someone else down for me to be successful does feel like some bullying way of living, and I don't want to be part of that. And I don't think most people do. I think most people, given the choice of saying, "Hey, we all can succeed. We can all, pull each other up. Each one pull one up." There's a gift there, and I trust if we can get back to trusting that human beings really want the best for each other. There's a challenge for us to continue to create, and I hope that this podcast and other podcasts that every time you speak, I hear that, right? We want to grow humanity in a much better way for all of us. And Bo Bennett, I am grateful to have you on.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Bo, if people want to get a hold of you and come see you, by the way, let's go do the plug for the website, bookbud.ai, right? Go write a book in 3 hours, right? It's an amazing website. Go do that now. I mean, audience, you guys want to do a book? I challenge you right now to go write your own book today. Like not like 6 months from now. I've been working on this for years. Like today, go write a book that you've always wanted to write. Bo has this system, this AI system that will really help drive your book. And really now it's a matter of doing some smaller edits that, it's amazing. So go to BookBud. So it's BookBud.ai, right?
That's it.
And go check that out. We'll put the description down below in the down in the description area. Bo, any place else that you want people to get a hold of you at?
Sure. You go to BoBennett.com, my name, BoBennett.com. And that's where you can find all the books that I've personally written, not with AI, but the old fashioned way. So I got a whole bunch on critical thinking, on psychology, a lot of the stuff we talked about reason, and even some fun books as well. So
go check out Bo's website. Do that today. Bo, so grateful to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks, Anthony.
Hey, audience, last week we had, 30-something thousand people, subscribe to us on YouTube alone. The other websites, it's amazing what we're doing on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It's amazing. The numbers have been great. I'm so grateful for all of you. But we did notice that some of you guys that made it to the end of a podcast weren't subscribers. If you could take a second right now and just do me a favor, for the whole crew in the background, Alyssa and Joe and the people that work tirelessly to put these interviews together and get the questions and the research, it makes a world of difference. And it helps us get amazing guests like Bo, and his process and his thinking helps us find the best people out there to interview. So if you could take a second and do that now, it would make a world of difference to me and the crew. So as always, we're so grateful for you listening.